Hi, welcome back to the Coin Studio. What if I told you a single old Australian penny, not gold, not silver, just a worn-out copper coin, could be worth $160,000 today? Stay tuned, because this isn't a myth. It's the unbelievable story of the Australian one penny. Let's moving on. First up, 1923 Australian one penny. Now prepare yourself, because what you're about to hear is the crown jewel of Australian pennies, the Holy Grail. The coin that changed lives and headlines. The 1923 Australian one penny. This isn't just a rare coin. It is the rarest circulation penny in Australian numismatics. So what happened in 1923? Well, the Melbourne Mint had no plans for mass penny production that year. Only a very limited number of working dies were used. The total number of coins released into general circulation is estimated to be between 15,000 and 30,000, but some experts believe the actual number could be even lower. Possibly under 10,000. That's an almost mythic figure for a coin that was intended for everyday use. No official mint records exist for the release of the 1923 penny, adding even more mystery. What we do know is this. Many of the few coins struck never made it into wide circulation. That's why even low-grade examples are fiercely fought over by collectors. This coin is so famous that it has been the subject of TV news stories, radio shows, and coin collecting documentaries. And the prices? A 1923 penny in good-to-fine condition with noticeable wear still fetches $15,000 to $25,000 AUD. A coin in very fine, VF, condition is sold at auction for $45,000 to $65,000 AUD. But here's where it gets truly unbelievable. In 2019, a 1923, penny in PCGS graded extremely. Fine condition, possibly one of the best surviving examples, sold for a staggering $130,000 AUD. In 2022, another high-grade 1923 penny changed hands privately for nearly $160,000 AUD. The 1923 penny isn't just money, it's a status symbol, a national treasure, and for many collectors, the pinnacle of achievement. If you ever find one, even in poor shape, you're looking at a life-changing discovery. Next up, 1911 Australian one penny. Imagine holding a piece of Australian history, struck more than a century ago. The year is 1911. King George V has just ascended the throne after the death of his father. King Edward VII, Australia is still a young federation, just a decade old. And in that moment of national identity and British connection, the 1911 Australian one penny is born. This wasn't just any penny. It was the very first issue of the Australian penny under King George V. It replaced the older Edward VII design, introducing a new royal portrait and a bolder, more confident national presentation on its reverse. The coin was minted in London, as Australia didn't yet have the mint capacity to produce all its own coins. That's why this penny, though Australian in circulation, still carries the London craftsmanship of the Royal Mint. The obverse features a left-facing bust of King George V, bareheaded, without a crown, a style that became iconic during his reign. The reverse design is classic, the word one penny centered in a ring, with Commonwealth of Australia, and the date 1911 circling around it. What makes the 1911 penny highly sought after isn't just its age or design, but its historical importance as the first George 50 penny and its often exceptional condition when well preserved. Now let's talk money. A 1911 Australian penny in average circulated condition is worth around $100 to $300 AUD, depending on its wear. But serious collectors chase this coin in mint state. Condition. That means coins with little to no wear, strong luster and clean fields. In 2020, a superb PCGS MS64, red-brown example of the 1911 penny sold at auction for an incredible $16,500 AUD. Even lesser uncirculated examples regularly fetch $6,500 to $7,000 AUD. That's the value of history in your hand, one penny, telling the story of a monarch, a nation, and the birth of a currency. Next up, 1915 Australian one penny. Now let's move to a year of chaos, courage, and wartime hardship. 1915. While the world was burning in the fires of World War I, Australia was sending troops to Gallipoli and beyond. This coin, the 1915 Australian one penny, circulated in a country that was still reeling from the costs of war, both in human lives and national morale. And yet, despite the chaos, this humble penny was minted, and it carries with it the grit of an era that shaped Australian identity. Unlike the earlier 1911 issue, The 1915 penny is notable because it was minted in Calcutta, India, due to wartime restrictions. The London Mint had its hands full with war demands, so the British Empire looked to its other minting facilities. These Calcutta minted coins bear no mint mark, but their origin is known to numismatists by subtle variations in die characteristics. These pennies were heavily circulated. After all, wartime economies didn't favor coin preservation, they favored survival. That's why high-grade examples are very hard to find. Collectors know this. They know the 1915 penny, in decent condition, is already hard enough. But in uncirculated, UNC, or extremely fine, EF grade, it's a true treasure. Let's talk auction prices. A circulated 1915 penny might sell for $300 to $500 AUD, depending on grade. But in UNC or choice UNC example, those are rare beasts. A certified PCGS MS62 brown example of the 1915 penny sold in 2019 for $14,800 AUD. Another notable sale. An NGC graded MS63 specimen reached $16,000 AUD in a private auction in 2021. These numbers tell us something important. War coins are more than metal. They are survivors. And collectors are willing to pay dearly for survivors in great shape. Next up, 1917 Australian 1 penny. Next we come to the 1917 penny, a coin born from the trenches of World War I, a currency that moved through the hands of a population marked by grief, rationing, and wartime industry. The 1917 Australian 1 penny isn't just a coin. It's a silent witness to sacrifice, industry, and perseverance. This year is extremely important for Australian coinage because 1917 marks the first time the Australian 1 penny was struck at the Melbourne Mint, finally moving some of the minting power home from London and Calcutta. There are actually two versions of this penny, one minted in London and the other in Melbourne. The Melbourne Mint version has a tiny H, mint mark under the lower scroll on the reverse, standing for the Heaton Mint, which struck some earlier Australian coins. What makes the 1917 penny especially collectible is the Melbourne no mint mark version. These coins were the beginning of Australia's gradual independence in coin production. These coins saw heavy circulation, and again, like other war-era pennies, the vast majority show serious wear. But here's the treasure. A full red, mint-state example of the 1917 penny is a crown jewel in any Australian pre-decimal collection. The coin in pristine condition is rare beyond words. Auction data confirms this. A PCGS MS65 red-brown example of the 1917 penny sold for a stunning $8,400 AUD in 2020. Another MS64 brown example brought in $7,000 AUD in a 2022 auction, proving that collectors don't just buy condition, they buy legacy. Next up, 1919 Australian 1 penny. 1919, a year of both recovery and mourning. The First World War had just ended, and Australia was facing a new challenge, rebuilding, a nation that had lost over 60,000 of its sons. In this time of hardship, a small but powerful object passed from hand to hand, the 1919 Australian 1 penny. But this isn't just a coin. It's a symbol, a fragment of Australia's post-war history, a reflection of resilience. The 1919 penny was minted during a transitional period for Australian currency. For the first time, coins were no longer exclusively produced overseas. This year marks the beginning of domestic large-scale coin production at the Melbourne Mint, and also at the Heaton Mint in Birmingham, which is denoted by the H mint mark under the scroll on the reverse of the coin. That tiny H, so small, often overlooked, makes a world of difference to collectors. There are actually three varieties of the 1919 penny. 1. No mint mark, struck at the Melbourne Mint. 2. H mint mark, struck at the Heaton Mint. For the rare double dot variety, an accidental creation of the die, where two small dots appear, one after the word Australia, and one after the word penny. Now here's where it gets fascinating. The 1919 double dot variety is one of the most elusive and sought-after Australian pennies ever made. Collectors go wild for this variety because it's both rare and unmistakably distinct. Let's talk auction values. A regular 1919 penny in circulated condition might sell for $150 to $200 AUD, depending on its wear and eye appeal. A well-preserved H mint mark penny in EF, extremely fine condition, can command $11,000 to $12,000 AUD. But a verified 1919 double dot penny in top condition? In 2021, an NGC-graded AU58 double dot sold for an eye-watering $16,000 AUD at auction. In 2022, a rare PCGS MS62 brown double dot fetched nearly $22,000 AUD. That's right, a humble bronze penny once worth a single cent, now selling for tens of thousands. That's the power of rarity, history, and Australian heritage. Next up, 1927 Australian 1 penny. The year is 1927, a time of grand ceremony and national pride. That year, Australia held one of the most significant events in its history, the opening of Parliament House in Canberra. It was a moment that marked Australia's maturity as a federation, and at the same time, in the pocket of every citizen, circulated the 1927 Australian 1 penny, an unassuming yet timeless relic of that patriotic year. The 1927 penny carries the portrait of King George V on the obverse and the classic Commonwealth of Australia design on the reverse. But unlike some other pennies of the 1920s, this year had a relatively high mintage of around 6.6 million coins, making it more accessible. But that doesn't mean it's common in high grades. Most 1927 pennies were heavily circulated, often in poor or average condition, especially due to Australia's economic conditions leading up to the Great Depression. As a result, uncirculated and high-grade examples have become quite valuable. The coin also has a few varieties, including differences in rim denticles, die-fill errors, and partial dates, all of which drive up interest and auction value among error and variety collectors. Let's talk numbers. In circulated condition, a 1927 penny is generally worth $50 to 100 AUD, a nice collectible for beginner collectors. In extremely fine EF condition, the price jumps to $1,500 to $2,500 AUD. A certified PCGS MS64 brown specimen sold in 2020 for 3,100 AUD. In 2023, a PCGS MS65 red brown, nearly flawless, sold at auction for a respectable $2,800 AUD. While the 1927 penny may not compete with the legend of the 1923, it remains a pillar of any pre-decimal Australian collection. It's a coin that reminds us that even in ordinary years, extraordinary treasures can be found. Next up, 1928 Australian 1 penny. Let's step into the world of 1928. Australia, still in the shadow of the First World War, was slowly recovering economically, politically, and socially. The Roaring Twenties were drawing to a close, and the global economy was about to stumble into the Great Depression. It was a delicate, uncertain time, and through all of it, the 1928 Australian 1 penny quietly circulated from hand to hand. This penny carries the portrait of King George V, who had become a steady figure for the Commonwealth during tumultuous times. The reverse featured the classic 1 penny in a central ring with Commonwealth of Australia around it, a strong, nationalistic design that echoed unity in difficult times. The 1928 penny had a total mintage of around 214 million coins, making it relatively low compared to other years. That alone gives it collectible appeal, especially when paired with the fact that very few examples survived in high-grade condition. Most 1928 pennies that surface today are heavily worn. After all, these coins pass through an economy on the verge of a global collapse. For collectors, the key lies in condition. Here's how the numbers break down. In average circulated condition, a 1928 penny will typically sell for $40 to 100 AUD. In extremely fine EF condition, it can command prices between $4,500 to $9,000 AUD. But here's where it gets exciting. A PCGS MS64 brown example sold for $14,200 AUD in 2022. Even an MS63 example reached over $13,000 AUD. At auction in 2021, collectors prized the 1928 penny for its low mintage, strong historical context, and the challenge of finding a pristine example. It's one of those coins where history, scarcity, and story all come together. Next up, 1931 Australian 1 penny. Now, if you ask any serious Australian numismatist to name the top rare pennies of the 20th century, you can bet the 1931 Australian 1 penny will be on their list. Especially the famous dropped 1 variety, one of the most legendary errors in Australian pre-decimal coinage. Let's start with the basics. The 1931 penny was minted during the heart of the Great Depression, a time when unemployment was sky high and people were struggling to put food on the table. Coin production was drastically reduced, and only 400 pennies were minted. the second lowest mintage of all regular Australian pennies after the 1923. But what makes the 1931 penny truly fascinating is that it comes in multiple varieties, and each one tells a different story. 1. Indian obverse, struck with a die made in Calcutta. 2. London obverse, struck using older dies from the Royal Mint. Horsey, the dropped 1 variety, a spectacular die flaw where the 1 in the date appears well below the other numbers, giving it a crooked or fallen look. This last variety, the dropped 1, is the stuff of legend. It's one of the most collectible Australian penny errors ever made. So how much is this coin worth? Let's look at the numbers. A regular 1931 penny in circulated condition sells for around $100 to $500 AUD, depending on grade. In very fine, VF, to extremely fine, EF, prices can rise to $1,000 to $2,500 AUD. But for the dropped 1 variety, in 2021, a PCGS AU55 dropped 1 penny sold for $19,200 AUD. A high-grade example in PCGS MS62, brown sold in 2022 for $25,000 AUD. This coin is more than rare, it's revered. For collectors, owning a 1931 penny, especially a dropped 1, is a milestone, a story you never stop telling. Next up, 1932 Australian 1 penny. The year is 1932. Australia was in the grip of the Great Depression. The Sydney Harbour Bridge had just opened, symbolizing progress, yet the nation was economically paralyzed. Amid all this, the 1932 Australian 1 penny emerged, a coin that holds both symbolism and scarcity. The mintage that year was 216 million, a modest number, and far lower than in years before or after. What's particularly interesting is that this was a year when coins were used hard. With every penny counted and every meal a challenge, these coins didn't sit in drawers, they were spent, used, and worn out. That makes high-grade 1932 pennies extremely scarce today. Let's talk money. In circulated grades, a 1932 penny fetches 140 to 150 AUD. In very fine VF condition, prices often exceed $1,450 AUD. In extremely fine EF condition, expect to pay $2,200 to $2,800 AUD. In 2021, a beautiful PCGS MS64 brown example was sold for a stunning $1,600 AUD. In 2023, an NGC graded MS63 red-brown variety hit $8,200 AUD at a private sale. Next up, 1936 Australian 1 penny. Finally, we come to 1936, a truly historic year, as it marks the final issue of the penny bearing King George V's portrait. That alone makes the 1936 Australian 1 penny a sentimental favorite among collectors. King George V had ruled since 1910, overseeing not just a monarch's term, but an era, 2 world wars, the Roaring Twenties and the Great Depression. His passing in 1936 brought about the abdication crisis, the rise of Edward VIII, and eventually the reign of George VI. But before all that, Australians were still spending the humble 1936 penny. One last salute to the stability George V had brought. This coin saw heavy circulation, with a mintage of approximately 12.2 million, making it one of the most common pennies of the 1930s. However, condition is key. High-grade examples, especially those with full red luster, are genuinely scarce. What sets the 1936 penny apart, however, is the proof issue. In very small numbers, proof coins were struck, and these coins are some of the most valuable and beautiful Australian pennies ever made. Here's how it stacks up at auction. Circulated examples are common, ranging from $150 to $160 AUD. In UNC or Choice UNC, prices jump to $1,250 to $1,800 AUD. In 2022, a PCGS MS65 red-brown sold for $4,500 AUD. And for collectors chasing the best, a genuine proof 1936 penny in PCGS PR64 red sold at auction for $28,000 AUD in 2020. That's right, nearly $30,000 for a coin that was never meant to circulate. It's more than money. It's a royal farewell, a final masterpiece of a monarch's coinage, the last breath of King George V's reign, and the final penny before a royal storm. 1936 marks the end of an era and the beginning of history. If you also have an old coin, let us know in the comments. Your coin might be featured in our next video. Thanks for watching and happy collecting.